Good morning, everybody. Dr. Vasquez here, coming to you live, actually a bit more live today than I was yesterday. So right now I'm going to talk about a few different topics. Topic number one is I just got new glasses. The other glasses I had two pair of glasses, and I've had both of them for 17 years, 16 years. So I finally got some new glasses. This is just basic housekeeping stuff, kind of brain download, so to speak. The reason I didn't do a video yesterday like I had planned is because I was occupied with what's called an id reaction. Most of you don't know what an id reaction is, and you can't see it now because I don't have it anymore. But yesterday I woke up with what's called an id reaction. I used to think that id, in this context, was kind of like a Freudian id, like ID. Like, part of the human psyche. But turns out that id, in this context of dermatology, is what's called an interface dermatitis reaction is what it's called. And the reason it's called id reaction or interface dermatitis is because it's an inflammatory reaction that occurs at the interface between the dermis and the epidermis. So whatever triggers this causes an inflammatory response that's localized, kind of right below the skin, literally. Again, at the interface between the epidermis on top and the dermis below. So that's what I woke up with yesterday. I've only had that, this may be the only second time I've had it. I know that I had it once when I lived in Texas because I had really bad inflammatory reaction to getting overdosed with poison ivy, and as if that weren't bad enough, and it was horrible, after that cleared out, then I had an id reaction secondary to the inflammation from the poison ivy. So that was my first time to ever have an id reaction, and I was working in the corporate world at that time, and one of my office colleagues was a microbiologist, and she said, "You have an id reaction." I'd never heard of it, but yeah, I had it. So an id reaction can occur anywhere, but it most typically occurs on the inside, the sides of the fingers. And that helps distinguish it from contact dermatitis, for example, because contact dermatitis you would expect that on the surface of the fingers where you're actually touching things, and then you have a person would have an allergic response to plastic or latex or whatever. And I kind of thought it was that because I had been touching some tennis balls that are made out of latex. But if it had been a true contact dermatitis, we would expect collectively in this conversation that the dermatitis would be on the surface of the fingers, not on the side of the fingers. So yeah, I thought it was a contact dermatitis to latex for a few minutes, but then I could see it more clearly as it evolved yesterday morning. And it was definitely little vesicles of fluid on the side of my fingers. And that's what's called an id reaction. Again, id sounds Freudian, but it's actually interface dermatitis reaction. And essentially, it's always a secondary inflammatory response to something else. So what would be the something else that triggered it? Like I said before, the first time I ever had it, I didn't even know what it was, but it was secondary to having had a really bad inflammatory response to poison ivy or poison oak when I lived in Houston, but the event actually happened in Austin, Texas. I went kayaking with my dog, on Town Lake, which is the lake that runs through Austin. And my dog ran and was playing in the bushes and all this kind of stuff. I didn't think anything of it, of course. But then she came back and she was covered with poison oak or poison ivy, and she covered me with it. And I didn't know it until a few days later. But I never had contact with the plants, but she did. And then she contaminated me with an overdose of poison oak, poison ivy. That was horrible. But then after that cleared out, after about 10 days or so, then I had an id reaction. And again, The classic presentation of an id reaction are these little blisters on the sides of the fingers. One more time, if it were contact dermatitis, the vesicles would be here. The rash would be here, not on the sides. And if it were eczema, you would expect it more on like the back of the hand, typically. Or even psoriasis or whatever. I guess eczema could be in the palm too, but you wouldn't expect it necessarily on the sides. Anyway, that's what happened, and that's what slowed me down yesterday, and you can tell I'm still kind of recovering. But also from other things too, exercise and whatever else. So the reason that I had this reaction is because I had taken another round of azithromycin, so that what appeared to be the early stages of a sinus infection didn't evolve into a sinus infection. And so apparently I did the right thing, in my opinion, by taking the azithromycin. But as a consequence of killing off the bacteria, then I had a secondary inflammatory response that manifested as this id reaction, which you could think of as kind of like it's almost like a Herxheimer reaction. You know, it's basically a die-off reaction or an inflammatory response to whatever, in this case, bacteria, secondary to taking azithromycin. And that's why I had an id reaction, and my hands were just screwed up yesterday. I didn't feel like typing. I didn't feel like doing anything. But now I can move my hands and get back to work. So that's just a little bit of context and a little bit of clinical info. As you all know, I went through 3 doctorate programs. I don't remember ever being taught anything about an id reaction. So it's just one of those things that we learn outside of school. So now I got to learn it twice. So, topic for right now is going to be intracellular calcium. And I'm sure upon hearing that, most of you think, who could care less? But if I'm studying it, I'm studying it for a reason. And if I'm explaining it, I'm explaining it for a reason. And so I think this is important to know. So paradoxically, I'm going to do 2 things at the same time right now. I'm going to give you the conceptual overview, but for the most part, the conceptual overview is what you need to know. So it's the conceptual overview, which is typically not very detailed, but it's also sufficiently detailed for you to understand some of the implications of this and how to manage this clinically. So this is of importance for all of you out there, doctors or patients who are dealing with chronic pain. Also, any type of neuropsychiatric problem like bipolar, for example, but also the various neurodegenerative diseases too, like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So if you are, treating those from a patient perspective, like in your family, or you're trying to prevent these problems yourself, then obviously this is important. For people with chronic pain conditions like fibromyalgia, migraine, this is also important. And for those of you who are clinicians, treating people who have fibromyalgia, migraine, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, depression, increased risk for neurodegenerative problems in the future, this is important for that audience as well. So like I said, if I just say we're going to talk about intracellular calcium, everybody has the right to say I could care less, unless you already know something about the topic. But if you are, treating brain and psych problems and pain problems and neurodegenerative problems, then you need to know this. Again, that's obviously true for the clinicians, but it's also true for the patients, because obviously some of you are dealing with this stuff yourself. So I'm not going to give you the complete full meal deal right now because I'm still working on it. Day before yesterday, because yesterday I was screwed up. Day before yesterday, I continued to advance the diagram that I've mentioned before, that I've published now for the past 25 years. Well, that's probably true, but maybe it's more like I know that I published this in 2004, so that would make it 22 years, but I may have published it for my orthopedic students back in 2000 when I was teaching orthopedics. That part I don't recall, but I don't think so. I think I originated this diagram in 2004. So this is, of course, inflammation mastery. And I've shown you this diagram now a couple times recently because I have been working on it. This is page 871, where here I talked about an NMDA receptor, which is kind of a glorified calcium channel, very important in the brain. And it's kind of balanced by its neighbor, which is a GABA receptor. And the biochemical bridge between these two, other than the intracellular events that happen, but if we were to stay on the external side of the receptor for both of these, NMDA, which is a glutamate receptor, or GABA, which is obviously a GABA-type receptor, but it responds to other things like chamomile tea, and niacinamide can also stimulate this GABA receptor. I don't know if I actually said that in the book. Yeah, niacinamide, ethanol, and several botanicals can stimulate this receptor. And that's all fine, and that creates kind of a relaxing effect. What we're trying to counterbalance or counteract is this NMDA receptor. Generally speaking, NMDA receptors are important for learning and memory and things like that, but overstimulation of this receptor causes neurotoxicity and excitotoxicity. So this is the one that we're concerned about, because when it gets activated, it allows the entry of sodium, but also calcium. And calcium, as I've said before, and I've written about, and I just posted the article again a few days ago, calcium is an intracellular messenger required for certain things, but it also triggers a lot of inflammation. So that's why this is kind of a pink star, because this is where things get bad. So if too much calcium enters the cell, then it's going to create an inflammatory response within the neuron, which is basically your brain, and that's going to screw things up. It also amplifies pain. So that's why you have to know this pathway. Again, it gets activated by glutamate because it is a glutamate receptor. It gets activated by a few other things too, like homocysteine. But we could convert that glutamate into GABA, so we go from an excitatory toxic effect into a neuroprotective and calming effect here. This is just one step. This is one enzyme, and that one enzyme requires vitamin B6. So this is, part of the story behind why vitamin B6 is so important for the brain, because it converts glutamate, which is excitatory and potentially toxic, into GABA, which is calming and neuroprotective. So we have to have vitamin B6. All right, I'm going to set the book down because the book's actually pretty heavy, as you can see. So I'll show you the diagram. I think I said it was page 871. Yep, 871. So I'm going to set that down. Ugh, if it doesn't hit me in the face. So, in order to apply this stuff clinically, you have to know how to do that. So I just told you that the conversion from glutamate to GABA, which is a good thing, requires B6. But you would also then have to know, let me say that slightly differently, even though it's the same concept. It requires active B6. So obviously vitamin B6 comes in different forms. Most commonly in supplements, you're getting the pyridoxine hydrochloride form. That's fine, but that's not the active form of the vitamin. It has to get converted into the active form, which is pyridoxal 5-phosphate. That requires other nutrients. So, this is what I've said before, and this is just basic foundational nutritional knowledge. But for your body to function, for the human body to function, those reactions require nutrients. But the activation of those nutrients, especially from a synthetic form like a multivitamin or something like that, which is fine, A lot of people want to talk a bunch of stupid stuff and they want to say, oh, synthetic vitamins are toxic, or synthetic vitamins don't work, or synthetic vitamins are just, it's part of the pharma cartel and all this. That's just a bunch of stupid stuff from people who have never worked in the real world, is basically the answer there. So, and that's just the truth of it, you know. Synthetic vitamins still work. That's why we use them. That's why they're sold. But you just have to know how to use them.